So with this work right here, Snow Crossing, it was a smaller piece, and it was actually formed from a larger painting, and I liked the way the creek was working, and I sort of cropped it out actually from a larger painting and put some figures in it and I wanted a darker mood, and in many of the works in this show, I have that kind of higher contrast going, and with this one was the sort of beginning of that way of thinking about the paintings, at least some of the paintings, the contrast, the idea of some areas in deep shadow and some areas in high light, and that's what this is about. It's very much a mood type of piece. No real detail on the figures. They're more there for scale. Many times in a lot of the small works, that's what they're there for, is to establish how large this creek is, and it's really the idea of also the colors of snow, which snow is like this. It's the reflection of whatever is happening with light at the time, and so snow generally is white, but if the light is different, and if there are clouds, if it's a foggy day, whatever it is, that affects the color. With this piece here, this Pueblo piece, again, I wanted a time of day, pretty nebulous in a lot of ways. Morning, late day, probably. It's up to the viewer, really. I don't particularly want to establish a time of day that says this is what this is. Many of my paintings, let the viewer decide. And again, it's sort of this idea of clouds moving overhead, a stream of light spotlighting the figures and the Pueblo itself. And in a lot of my pieces, I'll glaze them, and you'll see in some of the others I do this too, where I push the value into a warmer or a cooler value with a wash or a glaze over the painting after I've completed it. So with this piece, it's a larger piece, but it's the same composition as the smaller one across the room. And in this piece, again, I wanted a mood type of approach to it, and many times I love the idea of a single figure, instead of a grouping, or it's a loneliness, a kind of quietness that one figure provides. Very much goes back to viewing Edward Hopper paintings and the loneliness and the quietness of some of those kind of like street scenes. But it's the same idea that it's a moment, very, very quiet moment in time, and my approach to this work, and especially a lot of the newer work, is before I was using smaller brushes, still thick paint, but now I'm using a little bit wider, flatter brushes and really loading the brushes up with a lot of paint, and so I'm achieving these big masses of planes of brushwork, and it's very satisfying to paint this way, because it's almost a blocky sort of approach and very dramatic, and so I'm enjoying that very much, especially when I get to the atmospherics of the idea of what the sky is doing, and again, the mood of the piece. So in my kachina work, which I reference from sometimes old historic pictures of kachinas, but many times what we have here in Mark Sublet's gallery. And I love painting these things because they give me a chance to not only be inventive with the kachina, because many times I will stay with the original color of the kachina, but I'll be inventive with it also. But it gives me a chance to be almost abstract in the background. So I have the best of both worlds, which is an actual object that I can render and paint, but the background I can draw into, scratch back into, scrape, do some abstraction and textural things until I feel I've achieved a nice balance between texture and flat, directions of brush strokes. It's quite a battle that keeps going on, and these take some time to paint because you never know quite when you're finished. But they're satisfying to do, and they're very fun to do. In Night Glow, I've painted a nocturne. I don't paint very many nocturnes, but this one kind of called for this night scene, but not a deep, dark night scene. So somewhat moonlit, because I enjoy color, and a lot of night scenes have a lack of color. And so it is getting close to dark, if not totally dark. But what I wanted a quiet type of scene here, and the idea of the horse by itself, the figure in the hacienda, and just kind of standing there by the doorway. There's a story there, maybe, and then again, I want the viewer to make that up themselves and to enjoy the questions that may come from what's this about and why is this juxtaposed between the figure and the horse happening, and you know, there can be all kinds of stories you could tell from this, or maybe not any at all. Maybe it's just a quiet night scene before she goes back inside. Again, it's a chance to do a little bit different color treatment than the day and late afternoon scenes that I've done. Okay, Enchanted Stream is a piece that it's a forest scene, but it's again it's a chance to do big blocks of color, color that is accentuated by the fall colors, but is not totally realistic. But the title of the whole show is expressions and paint. So it's that expressionistic type of approach, which is the idea that, well, if there's color in the trees, why not put a little bit more color in the trees? And I like to work with some outline, whether it's red outline or so it's a combination many times of drawing, but really, again, that word balance of how much of a warm do you have against a cool, and what you're trying to achieve with the overall treatment of the paint and the light quality. And a different type of coloration for the sky, which is this turquoise type of sky. And everything, even though the color is pushed in some of these paintings, it all originates from what is real. It's just pushing that color even more. So in this group of paintings, they're all kachina imagery, but I wanted to do them in a very narrow format. They're 14 inches by 48 inches high, and it provides a different format than the square format, and it provides an interesting cropping of the imagery. It has a feeling that, somewhat influenced by Japanese prints and early impressionistic art, which was influenced by, again, Japanese prints, printmaking and woodblock printing, and in that narrow format, a very graphic, but yet, in my approach, still painterly. So many of these have what I was talking about earlier, the texture, the drawing, but it has a lot of arbitrary scraping and other kinds of mark making that is different than just brushwork. If you look at this one here, there's colors that are laid down, there's scratching into the paint that reveal the colors underneath, the surface colors. And so there's a lot of manipulation and moving of paint in and out, and again, a linear quality to some of it, and that's combined with the paint. And also back to that quality of dark background that pops the figure out. Same with Messenger in terms of the quality of paint and the different mark making. Very thick paint in this area, and an exploration of all the different shapes. And that's why, again, I love these kachinas, because there's so many wonderful shapes to begin with. And so my job that I have in terms of turning these objects into a painting is how to make them more interesting than the actual kachina itself, or at least as interesting. And the way I can do it is with different kinds of textures and color. In Sage Rider, this painting, 24 by 24 inches, I was just intrigued with not just the idea of here's a figure on horseback and with a pack horse and riding through the sage, but the idea that there's depth and there's trees, willows, a layering of mountains behind this figure, but I wanted a sense of detail on the horse and figure moving back to the trees, and then almost simplicity in pretty much flatness in terms of the hills behind. And I've talked about this before, where this is almost a Georgia O'Keeffe type of abstraction. If you isolate, take the figure out, you've got that type of approach to it. So I wanted a combination of detail, texture to simplicity, so you'd have an extreme depth of atmosphere to the piece. And this piece, Dappling, the three figures, I've done groupings of blanketed figures before, And in this piece, I really wanted to simplify the shapes even more. Again, where they're recognizable as figures, they're recognizable as light coming through the trees, hitting the figures, but they're simple enough that you can almost, the viewer can imagine what these faces are in detail. That's not the point of personalities in these figures. The point is what they're doing, where they're looking. Again, a very serene, quiet mood that I wanted to achieve. But keeping the color, even though there's a lot of texture in here, keeping all the little pieces of color fairly flat in their application. So this piece, in this particular show, I haven't done very many large pieces, but this is a 48 by 48. And I enjoy working large when I can, just because it gives me a chance to work with larger areas of color. Not that much changes in a large piece, but when you're dealing with this kind of surface, you have to think about what's going on in all the painting, and there's a lot of area in this, and in all the paintings, and this is a good example of it. In all the paintings, what I try to do is to achieve a sense of history with the painting. In other words, if I work on laying in paint, I paint over that paint, and then I lay a wash or a glaze over that paint, and then I paint some more over the paint, and maybe there's 10 layers on some of this paint until I achieve either the color or the shapes I want. That's what I mean by the history of the painting. But what that achieves, at least what I try to achieve with that, is if somebody's standing in front of this painting, they can view it again and again and again and find new things to look at. And if it keeps them interested, that's kind of my goal. Because if it keeps me interested, then I'm assuming that it keeps other people interested. And hopefully that's what I've achieved with this painting. So this painting, small painting, and I love doing small paintings, but sometimes they can be very difficult because all the shapes mean so much more than in a large painting. Every little shape is very, very important, and every little brushstroke means a lot. And I treat all my small paintings like this, very much with the same care and finish that I do the larger painting, just because it's just a difference in size. I never look at them as quick little studies for a larger painting, even though some of these paintings wind up being larger paintings. But many times what I do is I might do a large painting and then decide, ooh, I like that imagery, I'll do a small painting of that imagery. But I still treat them with a lot of care and spend a lot of time on each one.